Joining us on the show right now, Jim Irvine, the chairman of Buckeye Firearms Association in Ohio. And Jim, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program tonight.
Good evening. It's always a pleasure to be on with you, Cam.
Well, appreciate your time and a fascinating article at BuckeyeFirearms.org. Stick-ups and burglaries are on the rise in the workplace, and this was actually reported in the Wall Street Journal, right?
Yeah, I was reading the Wall Street Journal, and you read all these stories about robberies, and I mean we're so familiar with this stuff; it's commonplace. But this was a story on stick-ups and burglaries in the workplace, and not just convenience stores and banks and things we think about being robbed, but quiet office buildings, cubicles, insurance outlets, just these little tiny places where you work. And it struck me as a really interesting story because you don't think about this as being a workplace. And I think about being in those offices, and you always have this feeling of comfort, especially if you work there. You spend lots of time there. It's very, very relaxed, very boring. You know all the people that are in there, lots of just boring time. You have visitors who you don't know come and go frequently, and lots of businesses visiting people. So it doesn't strike anybody as unusual for someone who you've not seen before to be in your place of work.
Mm-hmm.
And the robberies in these sorts of locations seem to be going through the roof. And the article talked about psychological, like the after effects companies that give counseling to traumatized workers, and their work has gone up 15-20%, and which shows you the violent crimes in businesses has got to be up that much for them to be seeing this increase in business. So it's I just thought it was really an interesting thing that's going on, and then you start thinking, well, why is there an increase? And I thought, well, there's tons of stories in the news over the last year on all the new people that are buying guns. Firearm sales is through the roof. Everybody knows that.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of people are getting concealed carry license. Everybody knows that. Lots of states have passed castle doctrine. That's got lots of news. Well, if you're a criminal, walking into somebody's house has gotten a lot more dangerous in the last couple of years. But
Absolutely.
the offices haven't. That's not your home. That's not your castle. And lots of businesses have no guns policies or stuff like that. So from a criminal standpoint, he doesn't want to get shot. The office building is your safe bet. You've got somebody who's employed, so probably has some money in his pocket.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got your target that's disarmed with money available. So I guess it kind of makes sense for criminals to do that, and they've thought of it before I did, and we're seeing big statistics on that increase there.
The sad thing is they quote Richard Chavez from ComSci Corporation as saying, quote, the worst thing you can do in a robbery is resist, Jim.
That should be malpractice, because the best thing you can do in an armed robbery is resist with superior firepower. I don't think it's ever occurred to the good doctor to resist with superior power. He's thinking resisting in a fight versus a guy with a gun. Yeah, you know what? You're probably going to lose that. But if you've got a concealed carry license and you can use some tactics and you've got some training, the advantage is all yours. And it's like the Odie loop. Make him react to you. You be the aggressor. You take control, because now you're in charge of everybody's life. I'd a lot rather have a fellow, even if I hate guns and I don't want anything to do with it, I'd rather my fellow coworker, who I know well, is in charge of everybody's life in this room than some criminal who just walked in the room pointing a gun at me. That's really the choice you've got to make as an employer. Who do you want in charge of your employee safety? The thug off the street or your trusted employee?
Absolutely.
It's an easy decision.
And I remember, Jim, the story in the Wall Street Journal talks about the pair of insurance robbers suspected of robbing at least 30 insurance agencies in Houston. Do you remember the story from Houston? I think it was last year, where a crazed woman came into a building armed with a bow and arrow and started shooting at employees in the building. Turns out that there were two employees there who were right to carry holders who had their guns with them and were able to stop this attack. Now, again, this wasn't a robbery. This was a deranged individual who decided to, try to kill as many people as she could. But again, it was the presence of armed citizens who stopped this from taking place.
Lives are in danger. good guys with the guns save lives. They neutralize the threat, maintain control of the situation, and most of the time detain the criminal for police to get there.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so frustrating. It makes so much sense to you and I and all our listeners, but I don't know how an employer doesn't see that and enacts a policy that says, oh, by the way, you're not allowed to save your... I mean, imagine if the company policy, instead of saying no firearms, says you are not allowed to save your coworker's life. I mean, people would go nuts over that. But that's really what a no-guns policy is.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, and I realize we've been talking a lot about, kind of white-collar jobs, but you see this all of the time in the in terms of delivery drivers.
Yeah.
And it's been a few years now, but there was an armed citizen who was the manager at a Pizza Hut in Orlando, Florida, who was fired when two armed robbers came in, and he was able to defend himself and the two employees that were there. He still got fired for violating the company policy. He had his gun with him. They had been the victim of robberies before. He was very concerned about his safety and the safety of the people who worked there. He got canned. Now, luckily, he found another job working for a mom-and-pop pizza joint that encouraged him to exercise his right to carry. But this happens.
Yeah, and I think it was this one. It was one where someone's very similar, where one of the other innocent people with them talked about being in fear of their life and were thankful that he saved. Their thought was, I was going to die. He saved my life, and you're going to fire your employee for that.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of unbelievable, that attitude. But, as I was reading your article, there was also a very interesting quote I saw. Jennifer Rubin, an employment lawyer in New York. Federal law and most state laws require employers to provide safe workplaces. In general, worker compensation laws prohibit employees from suing employers for workplace injuries except in circumstances involving gross negligence or recklessness. All right, so here's an interesting question for you, Jim, because I'm sure the gun control advocates would say, well, look, you have to provide a safe workplace by banning firearms there, whereas gun owners or Second Amendment advocates or perhaps people with common sense would say you have to be able to ensure that an individual, if they are the victim of an armed robbery, if they are the victim of an armed criminal, can defend themselves. How do you define what makes that workplace safe?
It's hard, and I don't think we have a perfect definition of it, but I think as time goes on, certainly you and I, there's a growing body of evidence that says a no-guns policy does not make your employer safer. And it's ludicrous because I talk about, if you hang a sign, if you say no robbers or no beatings or no gun, no armed robberies, no one thinks for a second that's going to get followed. Well, it's just as insane to think some criminal is going to follow a no-gun sign. So it just doesn't make any sense. And we've come a long way. Society used to never think about, children in a car seat. The idea that you would charge a parent with negligence for failure to put their infant in a child seat was unthinkable 20 years ago. Today, I believe all 50 states have laws on that, and they prosecute parents for endangering their child's life. And I think, I don't know if we'll get to that point, but certainly when somebody gets hurt, if a business has a policy that disarmed the people that got hurt and did nothing to protect them, then I think they should be liable for that damage. And I think in time our society will go there because the body of evidence is growing bigger and bigger, every week as more stories come in. We know what works, we know what doesn't. Some people refuse to admit reality, but, the Earth's round, whether you're in the Flat Earth Society or not. It doesn't change the facts. And
absolutely.
The facts on safety and guns in the workplace are pretty well defined. And I think it would be funny if OSHA, who's perceived as a threat, rightfully so, gets around to the truth someday and prohibits these sorts of actions instead of encouraging the banning of firearms, which they've done on and off throughout the years.
Boy, I'd love to see that. I'm not sure we'll see that with the individual that President Obama has tapped to head OSHA, considering he's been very critical of parking lot legislation in the at you're right, Jim. It would be lovely to see that one day.
At If it happens under under the Obama administration, I'll buy you dinner any place you want there in Washington.
All right, sold, Jim Irvine.